Insiders. Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Conversations, Spilling the Beans with Patient Advocates. I'm Mary Fox, Vice President of the Insiders, and I'm the moderator for today's episode. Today we have fibroid advocate Tanika Gray and Elizabeth Franklin, who are joining us to talk about their experience with fibroids. According to the National Institute of Health, 20 to 25% of women of reproductive age are living with fibroids, and up to 80% of women will develop them by the age of 50. It's very common, and some women even develop them at a younger age. While fibroids are common, Black women are at most risk of developing fibroids in their lifetime. And so with that in mind, Tanika, please introduce yourself. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your work and your mission.
Well, first of all, Mary, thank you so much for having me. I'm always super pumped and psyched to have these conversations because I feel like they are so important because there's so many people suffering with uterine fibroids. As you mentioned, the statistics are startling, and that's really why I wanted to start my organization, the White Dress Project, partly because it was my own personal story. I've had 3 myomectomies, which is a surgical removal of fibroids. And after my first myomectomy, where there were 27 fibroids taken out, I knew that I didn't want to suffer in silence anymore. I felt like I was the only one who, wouldn't wear white clothing to a white clothing party. I was always the one on a road trip who had to stop at the rest stop, every rest stop, to use the bathroom, always looking, bloated and pregnant when I wasn't. So for me, the journey of speaking out and being an advocate is a long one, but it was surrounded by years of silence and years of feeling like I was alone. And I just didn't want to feel like that anymore. So after that first myomectomy, 27 fibroids removed, I decided that I wanted to do something for people who were managing life with fibroids. And I just really couldn't understand why there were no walks, runs, nobody had a t-shirt on. And I felt like the moment I mentioned I had fibroids, it was like, yeah, girl, who doesn't have fibroids? And I just felt at some point that that was unacceptable. And I felt like there were so many people who were suffering in silence, including myself. So I started the organization because I wanted support. Selfishly, I didn't want to feel alone. And I knew that if I was feeling this way, then there were other people who were feeling this way. One of the first things that we did with our organization is we wrote legislation to get July declared as Fibroid Awareness Month. I'm in the media full time. I work for a network, and I felt like this needs some type of media campaign. It needs some type of publicity, because just the stories alone are really just going in a vacuum and people don't care. And I wanted to make sure that I put my media hat on and I put my personal story hat on to really find ways to amplify this story. So the White Dress Project has been here 10 years. We celebrated 10 years this past July. Really excited about that. And, I'm sure we'll talk further about all our initiatives, but really for me, it's really turning my personal story into a movement that has helped so many people and really empowers people that their story really has a lot of power, especially with something like uterine fibroids, where there are so many variations in how your story can unfold. I think it's given a platform for people to share their stories, listen to stories, and resonate with it. And when you're going through any reproductive health issue, feeling lonely is, I always say, like the silent symptom. You don't even recognize how much it's harping on your mental health, but it has a great impact.
Absolutely understood. Thanks for joining us. And last question before Elizabeth introduces herself. What's your beverage? What's your hot drink that you've got with you today?
Yeah. So in my trusty White Dress Project shameless plug here mug, I have a ginger lemon concoction, and it's so good. I'm really not like a fall girly, but it's given fall vibes with like just the aroma and the taste. So I'm enjoying it. And I'm a tea lover. I'm definitely not a coffee girl, but tea lover.
Perfect. That's great. Elizabeth, thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself and also the beverage you've joined with us this evening.
Thank you so much, Mary. I appreciate it. I am both in awe of Tanika and also like, do I have to go after her because she's so incredible? I feel very similar to her on many of the points that she's made, but I'll start out first and foremost with I am a fall girly. I have my Pug Dragon Cup because it's a little bit late in the evening, so you know you gotta keep it exciting. And there's some chai, fall goodness in there. So very much appreciate the opportunity to have a beverage and chat with you ladies. So like Tanika, I have been dealing with fibroids for several decades. I remember right after I got married at 25, finding out that I had a pretty significant fibroid at the time. Unlike Tanika, like she said, there are so many different variations. I don't tend to get a ton of fibroids all over, but just really large fibroids. So I underwent a myomectomy to remove a grapefruit-sized fibroid the first time. And then several years later, I underwent another myomectomy to remove what my doctor described is about the size of a football. So similar to Tanika, incredible bloating. You feel like you're pregnant, right? You look like you're pregnant. It's just very uncomfortable. I had incredible bleeding. I ended up in the emergency room because I thought I would need a blood transfusion at one point. Not able to walk from one side of the office to the other side of the office without bleeding out in your workspace. As a woman, this is an incredibly embarrassing, and I feel like I'm not a very easily embarrassed person. It's incredibly embarrassing and it's painful, right? None of this feels good. If you have something in your body that's creating this much discomfort and pain, it's really a quality of life issue. And, when you end up in the ER thinking you need a blood transfusion, it could ultimately be something worse. So, Tanika talked a lot about the fact that there wasn't a place for her to turn when she found out she had fibroids. And I absolutely felt that way as well when I was 25. So this was 15 years ago. It felt like nobody was talking about it. And, frankly, I think and know that it's because it's a woman's health issue. And I recall my first doctor saying, do you know what you did to sort of get fibroids? And I said, no. And he goes, neither do I. Nobody does. And, that's simply because there's not enough research funding. There's not enough attention to women's health issues. And add on to that, Mary, you brought up the fact that it's more likely to impact women of color, Black women in particular. And then that just decreases the attention and focus and research and funding. And so it's a real shame because so many of us are impacted by this. It's such a significant quality of life and health issue and something that so many of us are living with. And I'm excited to talk about sort of the treatment journey as well, because knowing you have it and being diagnosed is step one, but going through the treatment journey is a whole other journey in and of itself.
Absolutely. Thank you both for introducing yourselves. And Elizabeth, you set up the first part of our conversation so nicely. It is about that early diagnosis process. And as we get started, insiders, anyone listening, please, I just need to say that nothing we're saying here is medical advice. We're not promoting any products or manufacturers. Anything that you hear here, please ask with your physician before you try anything new. So Elizabeth, we had insiders submit questions. They wanted to hear from you both, on some questions that they have, people living with fibroids. So the first question for you is that what were your initial fibroid signs and symptoms? And did you know you had fibroids before you went to the doctor, or was that new?
I did not know. I'm not sure I ever had heard about fibroids in my early 20s. And I just knew that my periods were extraordinarily heavy and that I was carrying what I thought was excess weight around my belly and I was just in pain. And when you tell the average gynecologist those symptoms, you're not really listened to, right? It sounds like it's just a heavy period. And so by the time we figured it out, my gynecologist palpated my belly and really was listening to me and said, I can feel it from the outside that you have fibroids. And how much, what strength tampon are you going through? What kind of pad are you going through? How often? And so once we really started to piece it apart and talk about what those sort of, what I consider quantitative measurements are, how much blood are you bleeding on a regular basis? People started to listen. Whereas when I just told my qualitative story, it was considered just another sort of woman's experience of having a period. And where, again, I think what I've learned the most from this is that we're not really listened to. And again, when I talk about my treatment journey, that's really the theme of the treatment journey as well, which is unfortunate because, again, I think as a woman, when you present with a health problem, it's really just not something that's taken seriously.
And with your symptoms, you mentioned a few at the onset of your diagnosis. Did those change for you throughout the years, or were they pretty consistent?
Really consistent for me. I have always had extraordinarily heavy bleeding, pain, but then there were things that interfered with my life. So, for example, I got an IUD. I decided to switch off of birth control and get on an IUD, and my body actually expelled the IUD. That's how much I was bleeding, and that's how much, was coming out of my body. My body couldn't hold on to the IUD. And every time I got an IUD, it was getting tangled up in the fibroids. And I would say, are we sure that everything's okay, that I'm not in jeopardy of being hurt by the IUD or that it's working appropriately? And the answer was always, yeah, it's in there. You just, you can't really see it because it's tangled up in the fibroids. And so once my body started rejecting it, the time I ended up in the ER, my body had pushed the IUD out. So consistent pain and extreme bleeding. And then when you try to live your life, especially as a woman handling women's health challenges, then you come across these additional challenges that present themselves.
How long would you say it took you to get a diagnosis, if you could put a time frame on it?
It's hard to say. I have a timeline in my mind just because I knew that I got married at 25, and it was sometime a few years after that I just thought that it was heavy periods. And so finally I think I was 28 when I had my first myomectomy before, but I had been, I think that I've been dealing with this for years since that point, because as long as I can remember, I always dealt with extremely heavy periods.
Understood. Tanika, how about you? Same questions. Those initial fibroid signs and symptoms for you, what were they? And did you know that you had fibroids before you went to the doctor, or was it a surprise?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback really quickly on what Elizabeth said, because I think it's so, so important. It's this idea of how is your quality of life being impacted? And when she was telling her story and she talked about not being able to walk across the office floor or boardroom without bleeding out, I thought to myself, like, how many times have I been in a conference room, a boardroom, presented and had to stand up, God forbid, and being on your period and just knowing the incident that could happen shortly after, or that could be happening. So I think we don't pay attention enough to the quality of life symptoms because we have so normalized being a woman. I remember when I was going through all of this, and my symptoms started at a really early age, probably around 14 or 15, where it was just always the thing. Like, Tanika just always had heavy menstrual cycles, always the pain, always looked bloated. And I've always been a pretty slim person. So just the protruding belly was just always a thing for me. And to answer your question, I was familiar with fibroids because my mom had fibroids, and she told me about them because I saw her and I heard her go through losing a set of twins. So she lost a set of twins before me, thought she couldn't have children, adopted, and then got pregnant with me. I'm her only biological child, and then got pregnant again with twins, and lost that set of twins. So I was familiar, very familiar. Hey, it's the thing mommy went through. It's the thing that used to cause her to bleed, and the thing that made her lose my brothers and sisters. And even when I was going through all of those symptoms as a teenager going into college, my mom and I both were just like, okay, this is how you line your underwear. This is when you take the ibuprofen. So just all about managing symptoms, but never really conversing about what is the root of this? Like, could this be the same thing you had? And when we think back to that and we tell that story, both of us are like, what were we thinking? And I remember the first time I went to the doctor for the heavy bleeding, Elizabeth alluded to this, just the anemia and thought of blood transfusion. I've had 6 blood transfusions due to fibroids because my hemoglobin could just never stay up, similar to Elizabeth, because I was just always profusely bleeding. And so I've had multiple blood transfusions. And the first time that I went to a doctor to talk about it, They couldn't figure it out. And they said that what we need to do is have a DNC. And now, if you know anything about a DNC, it's usually used after miscarriage to remove matter from your uterus. And that was not the case here. And I had to go through the awkward conversation of like, mommy, no, I'm not having sex. No, I wasn't even, like the whole weird, like I was like 20 maybe, or 19, and just having that weird conversation. So needless to say, I was not dealt with properly or diagnosed properly. My symptoms were dismissed. The first time that somebody actually said something to me about and used the word fibroids, I was probably about 27. And they said, has anyone ever told you that you have fibroids? And I literally said to them, the thing mommy no, like, no, this is just like a period. Like, I'm just a woman. Mommy told me that you're a woman. This is how it goes. So I say all that to say that, yes, I was aware, but I was very shocked when I actually got diagnosed. And I think the arc of that for so many women is that they may be aware, but we have so normalized period symptoms. We have so stigmatized bad periods, or what we consider bad periods, menstrual pain, and thinking that pain and heavy bleeding and even the psychological issues that come along with it, the bladder issues that come along with it is normal, has got to stop. Because we have normalized it so much and because we have categorized it as just being a woman, then so many of us are suffering in silence. So I was aware. My mom was a nurse, like had all the resources, and still was like, the thing mommy had? No, not me. Which I think is unfortunate, but obviously a part of my story. And luckily I was able to, rebound from that. But I think to myself, like, what if I had acknowledged, or we had talked more in depth about why I was having these symptoms at 15 years old? Why was I bleeding like this? My trajectory might have been different.
Understood. And for you, Tanika, were your symptoms pretty consistent, through the whole experience, or did you experience changes? How about that for you?
Yeah, I think as I've gotten older and the multiple surgeries that I've had, like symptoms have definitely worsened, lessened, changed. Things I didn't even know were associated have proven to be associated. My last myomectomy in August of 2023, I had to have what they call a bowel resection, because after my other two myomectomies, my bladder connected itself to my uterus. So because of that, there were fibroids that were behind my bladder that, unless the medical term is like take down, well, that doesn't sound too medical, but take down your bladder. So it just means that like general surgeon has to come in and literally like remove your bladder from your uterus. And it was very scary for me because we all know, you mess with your bladder one way or the other, something potentially could go wrong, which leads to other bladder concerns. So over the years, things have definitely changed for me, but I've been pretty consistent with the heavy bleeding, the pain. But I think we also need to talk about issues that we don't readily talk about, which is the bladder, which is the mental health component, which is the anemia, which is the pica, and having all these symptoms and cravings of ice. And my thing wasn't even ice, it was soap. Like I wanted to lather soap all the time. I didn't get as far as wanting to eat it, but wanting to lather soap, would buy all the soap in the store, bar soap. So I think it is those things too sometimes that we don't even associate necessarily with reproductive health, but we need to converse about more.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, is there anything you want to add to that? Kind of that additional component?
Yeah, I completely agree with Tanika in terms of kind of tying it back to one of my original points, was that women's health just is poorly researched, right? And so when we think about if it's not just the bleeding and the pain, which are associated very closely with your normal period experience, which I love, Tanika, when you said it has both been normalized and stigmatized. How do we live in a world in which those two things happen at once? But it's absolutely true. But the mental health issues, I really appreciate the story Tanika told about, the bladder. It's one of those things that as the doctor's going down through the potential risks, they just kind of cruise over it, right? Like it could nick any of the surrounding organs. This is serious surgery. This is painful surgery that is happening. And the 2 myomectomies that I had, and I almost had a third. I've recently had a hysterectomy, which I'll be excited to tell everyone about. They were incredibly painful surgeries, right? And nobody really prepared me for that. I think I generally have a pretty high pain tolerance. I'm not one to complain often about pain, but nobody prepared me for the significance and the severity of these surgeries. And I think Tanika's story about, the interaction with the uterus and the bladder is incredibly important because these are not the things that people tell you. They act like it's going to be a simple in and out outpatient procedure. And I hope that for some people it is, but it was never that case for me.
Understood. Thanks for sharing. So this next part of our conversation is a little bit more about advocacy, awareness, and education. You both alluded to that, and kind of talking about your original experiences. And so again, these questions are straight from the insider community. And please, again, as you're listening, just remember this is not medical advice. Please do check with your physician. So, Tanika, an insider wanted to know about the White Dress Project. How does it help with fibroids, with the advocacy, with healing? What resources do you provide?
So I'm so proud of the White Dress Project because I created what I needed, which was support. It was resources. It was access to minimally invasive gynecologists. So I really am proud of that we provide all of those resources. And we do those in a host of ways. We have events all across the country. We do webinars. We have conversations like this with your community that is beneficial. And I think what's most important about the work that we do, we throw great events. We have wonderful conversations. But I think I'm most proud about with the work that we do at the White Dress Project is the fact that we have revolutionized and championed storytelling. 10 years ago, when I wanted to share my story, it was like very taboo. I remember when I told my mom I was going to start the organization and, what I was going to do to change women's health. She was like, okay, honey, well, tell everybody else's story, but don't tell anybody you had 27 fibroids removed. And I think it's just her generation of how she grew up that, somehow as a woman, if you share these types of stories, anything below the belt, it lowers your sophistication value or class value. And, we're immigrants, we're from Jamaica. And so coming to this country was already such an opportunity. So you don't want to do anything that kind of taints who you are. So that was just her thought process. And quite frankly, it was my thought process as well. Like, you just don't talk about these things. But I wanted to make sure that within our organization, we made women understand and people who have a uterus, allowed them to understand that, no, your story is where your power really lies. So outside of the events, outside of everything we do on Capitol Hill, well, actually, I will say something about Capitol Hill, which is also important. Elizabeth alluded to this, like, the level of care and money that is put into women's health is dismal, right? It is, I don't want to get the statistic wrong, but the when it's considered like the ranking of health issues that are funded, women's health is like number 2 from the bottom. And it's alarming and concerning. Additionally, with this political climate that we're in, it's equally concerning. And I remember one of the first times I went to Capitol Hill to advocate for our organization and the work that we were doing, legislators said to me, well, Tanika, does anyone die from fibroids? And I remember like not wanting to, be inappropriate right there and tell him what I really felt, but I remained professional and said to him, sir, I'm really concerned that you think that death has to be the standard for us to advocate for funding and further research. And while that comment to me was very alarming, I feel like it was an honest comment and a comment that many of his colleagues may have the same sentiment. So I say all of that to say that it's so important for us to use our voice and tell our stories. I've been doing this for 10 years, and the amount of stories and variations really feeds me all the time because it's not the one size fits all. So the work that we do is very important because we bring community together. And as humans, that's what we're here for. We're here to connect. We're here to share in our lived experiences. And if our organization can champion that, that's what we want to do. The events are great. The, webinars are great. Who we get to meet is great. But when we get together and community, when we have bold conversations about what's going on with our health, the things that our grandmothers and our mothers were too ashamed to tell us about. And, a lot of times we blame them. Like, why didn't mommy tell me about this? Why didn't granny tell me about this? But we also have to think about the context within which they were operating as well and give them some grace. So now that we know better, I think opportunities like this are what we need to forge ahead with. And that's what we try to do at White Dress.
Thank you for sharing such powerful work that you're doing. Elizabeth, when it comes to that diagnosis, right? So someone's gotten a diagnosis and so now they know they have fibroids, right? So they've reached that point. In your experience, and an insider is wondering about this, what's a reasonable time frame to keep going back to the doctor to get it checked? So someone's saying, if I've been diagnosed with fibroids, I'm still experiencing symptoms. In your kind of experience, Elizabeth, what did that look like? What was a reasonable amount of time to keep going back to the doctor to get it checked, to have your symptoms looked at, things like that?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly dependent on the individual's journey. So I'll just share my story. And
Absolutely.
when we finally figured out I had fibroids and they were so large and were causing so many issues, it was presented to me as something that needed to be fixed right away. And of course, as someone who is experiencing symptoms, like I mentioned, I did want it fixed, right? And all that was presented to me was a myomectomy, right? It was presented as there's a surgery that you can get the fibroid removed and then you'll go on with life. It's a pretty, low invasive, minimally invasive surgery. It's kind of not that big of a deal. And I was, like I said, I was about 27 at the time, married for a couple of years. And I just thought, I'm surprised with myself that I didn't do more research at the time, but I thought, okay, this sounds like the thing to do. So once I was diagnosed, I pretty quickly received the myomectomy. And when I woke up from that myomectomy, I remember thinking, this is awful. This was so incredibly painful. At the time, my first myomectomy was robotic and they used a morcellator, which is a device that pulls the fibroid out and spins and macerates it and pulls it out of your body. Since then, the morcellator has been banned by the FDA because if you had cancer, it could spread the cancer around your body. That was my first experience with a myomectomy. And after that, all my life, I thought that I probably did not want to be a mother to my own biological children. I did not want to have children. And it was after that I thought, if I do this again, if the fibroid comes back, I want to have a hysterectomy. I don't want to go through another myomectomy experience. It's right for me. And when you look up treatment for fibroids, the first thing that comes up is hysterectomy, right? Usually in the places that you look. And so 5 years later, I had another giant fibroid, and I was, let me think, probably 32 at the time. So plenty old enough to know what I wanted to do with my health and my body. And I was 100% sure I did not want to have children by that point. And I will never forget the gynecologist told me that it was borderline unethical for him to perform a hysterectomy on me because I would change my mind and I was too young, right? And what do you say to that? I just thought, I guess myomectomy is the only option. So I had another myomectomy. And one of the things that Tanika and I did mention, and I'd love to hear her perspective, in addition to the pain, and, it's a pretty significant surgery, even though you can technically be in and out in one day, it also changed my body. It created sort of a shelf under my belly because they create cuts in places that, as a woman at the time, as a relatively young woman, no one told me about it, right? It changed my body. It changed the way that I appeared in clothing. And so I'm able to get rid of the belly that I had from the fibroid only to be replaced by a bodily change from a surgery that, again, no one told me what to expect. They just said, this is what we're going to do. And so I finally, this time around, when I had additional fibroids that were causing issues, I knew I wanted a hysterectomy, and I was not going to go to a gynecologist that did not perform it. So I went to another gynecologist. And keep in mind, I work in healthcare. I'm used to navigating the system. I often think when I leave the doctor, good God, if I feel this way, how does the average person feel navigating the healthcare system? Which is why it's so incredible that Tanika and the White Dress Project exists, because this stuff is scary to navigate and it's difficult to navigate. So the third gynecologist I went to pushed me off the hysterectomy again. I'm 40 now. And this was a couple of years ago, and she said no. And so finally I found an extraordinary surgeon who I walked in, and I was pouring out my story at such a clip that she said, Elizabeth, take a deep breath. I'm going to listen. I will answer all your questions, but we're going to do this. We are going to give you a hysterectomy. And so for the first time in 40 years, I felt listened to. And I had the hysterectomy about a month ago, and I've never felt better. To be completely done with it, the hysterectomy was actually far less painful than the myomectomies. And I know it's not an option. It's not the right option for everyone, especially people who want to maintain their fertility. But I finally was able to get the kind of care that I need. So Mary, that was a very long way of answering your question. There's no right answer for anybody in terms of how often they go back. It's really the journey that you're on, and that you really have to take self-advocacy to the next level and say, this is what I want based on my needs and preferences. And then I know Tanika is going to talk about this, but it also greatly angers me that it's often the flip side for Black women who perhaps hysterectomies are pushed on them versus why wasn't it, why are our experiences different? Why are hysterectomies pushed on Black women as the first place to go? And then for me, they're the last option. And we could read into so many different racial and socioeconomic and all these different pieces that go in it. But I think it's a microcosm of these issues that we deal with in the healthcare system on a regular basis. And so important for Tanika and I to tell our stories and compare notes, because when we are having such different experiences in the healthcare system, something's very wrong.
Elizabeth and I could be long lost girlfriends, because so much of what she's saying is resonating with me when I think about her story that she just told and being offered other options rather than hysterectomy. Hysterectomy was the first option was offered to me. And I was 34 years old. And the doctor said, your uterus is way too compromised. You and your husband save your money, get a surrogate if you want to be a mother. Like, so cavalier. And I remember walking out of his office, going to the parking garage and bawling my eyes out, because one, I felt like I had done everything right? Go to school, get a good job, get married, and have a baby. And when it wasn't playing out for me that way, I immediately internalized that and thought that I had done something wrong. So to Elizabeth's point, it is so important for us, once again, to share stories, because it shows and highlights the disparity, the bias that happens in offices every day, and what real women are going through. And I think we can't shy away from the race conversation. Like, we didn't create it, so we don't have to shy away from it. And yes, it can be uncomfortable sometimes, because as a white woman, why is Elizabeth having a better, I wouldn't even say a better overall experience, but why are her options laid out for her more? And we were frankly around the same age. I was actually maybe a little bit older. And I'm so glad she brought up the point of not, sharing her personal experience about not necessarily wanting to be a mother. And it still wasn't an option. And I, came in there with a billboard being like, please, what can we do to save my uterus? Because before I was 6 years old, I was the one with all my Cabbage Patch Kids around me, because I wanted to be a mother so badly. Wanted to be a mother much more even than I had the desire to get married. So I get so hyped up about this, because I walked in there knowing my desire to be a mother. Elizabeth walked in there knowing that wasn't necessarily the path she wanted to take. And we were offered completely, why wasn't that reversed, right? So it gets me so hyped up because, to Elizabeth's point, she was in the healthcare system. She had access. She had the resources. She had the education. I feel the same way. My mom was a nurse. I have always been surrounded by well-educated people, always had access, had a good childhood, and this was still my outcome. So what happens to those people in socioeconomic status that don't have these resources, that don't have the access, that can't call a doctor on speed dial, that are in a rural area? What are they doing? And yeah, this could be a whole thing. So I'll let you go ahead, Mary, but I just wanted to acknowledge and thank Elizabeth for pointing that out, because it shows what is happening in real time with people who have access. So it just highlights how the disparity is even more alarming for people without those things.
And I just want to respond quickly to that, as infuriated as I am for myself, not given the option of hysterectomy, I'm even angrier at the stories hearing of Black women who are offered or even pushed to hysterectomy from the very beginning, because that's a decision that can't be undone, right? And so these two sides of the story, I think it's so important to share, Tanika, and thank you for your courage and sharing your part of the story as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And you both sort of already answered this next question, which is from an insider who does ask why. Why is it that a hysterectomy is often the first thing recommended to Black women? And when that happens for insiders, what are some ways they can kind of ask a doctor, how do you have that conversation? I want something different. I want to talk about my other options. Tanika, are there resources? How does an insider have that conversation? Say, no, a hysterectomy is not right for me at this time. What else can I do?
Yeah. So the first part of that question, why does this happen? Racism. Like, it's still prevalent in our country. It's still prevalent in our medical systems. And if we aren't talking about it on a tangible level as well. And when I say tangible level, I mean what's happening on our medical boards? What's happening in residency? What's happening in fellowship? There was a really great media segment done on a school in upstate New York that's really trying to incorporate health disparities and talk about racism in the medical system with their residents. And it was applauded, and, a whole television segment on it. And that was last year. So this idea and this historical context that we have around Black women can endure pain more, just as an aside, just wanted to mention that has been historically in our literature. How do we dispel, thoughts like that and literature like that over the years? And so that's the first part of the question, like racism. And it's still prevalent, and it's still prevalent in our medical system. And we need to have conversations and really figure out ways to change the system, because it is a systematic issue. I forgot the second part of your question.
No, that's all right. I'm happy to say it again. So when an insider, a Black woman living with fibroids, goes to the doctor and is presented with hysterectomy as the first option, what are some ways that the White Dress Project recommends having a different conversation? What are my other options? How might someone try to expand the conversation?
Absolutely. So the first thing that we talk about is that you are the CEO of your body, right? So these health practitioners that you have around you, that you see, they are on your board of directors, right? So you have to understand that you have the power to get rid of a board member anytime you feel like it. Now, I know that requires an additional PTO day. I know that requires new patient orientation and new patient forms again, but you're worth it, because any physician who is not willing to talk about multiple options and multiple treatment is not your type of physician, and not the physician that you want treating you. And not only the physician you don't want treating you, if they are only speaking to their level of expertise, then that is also a problem. Hey, I really don't do a laparoscopic myomectomy, so we got to go with an open myomectomy. Yeah, you're not my guy. Like I often equate it to dating. Like if you don't want kids, what are we talking about? If you feel like I should be a stay-at-home mom throughout our marriage, what are we talking about? And so I really feel like we have to take ownership of our health, because at the end of the day, every physician has a family. You cannot be the ultimate priority. They have other priorities, right? So while it is their responsibility to take care of us and provide sound medical guidance, you also, as a patient, has a part to play in that. So I always say that I didn't go to 4 years of medical school. I didn't do 2 years of residency, 2 years of fellowship. I don't have none of that, right? But I do know my body. I do know that the pain to the right of my belly button, go down a little bit, turn to the right, is probably my right ovary hurting me. And it's because I drank coffee today and I don't usually drink coffee, right? So even though that is not scientific, it may not be clinical, it is data that you can give to your doctor and they can synthesize it from there. I often say that we need to look at our physicians as partners. They have the medical expertise and scientific clinical expertise. I have the expertise about my body. I've been with her. Okay. I know this girl. So you have to have the confidence in that. And I think that this idea of white coat syndrome and what the doctor says goes is like prevalent with all of us. Like I think we've just grown up to, I don't have that expertise. So whatever they said goes, but we have to stand firmly in what you know about your body is an expertise as well. So anyone that's offered that and that's not what you want, advocate for yourself. Go find another physician. Come to organizations like ours that have resources that can find you a minimally invasive gynecologist, and really do your research. I know it's an extra tab open on your computer, but you're worth it.
Absolutely. And, along those lines of advocating for yourself and with the physician in the office, Elizabeth, when we started our conversation, you talked about your work experience. That's another place in which advocacy is so important, and people may find they have to advocate for themselves in the workplace. So a insider asked, complications from fibroids can impact my professional performance. Are there workplace accommodations? How do I have that conversation? Any suggestions from your experience, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I will say I have been extraordinarily fortunate to work with, my supervisors who were willing to listen and hear me out and give me the time off to do what I needed. But at the same time, I wasn't telling them every time I was bleeding heavily, or when I was, walking from the bathroom to my chair and bleeding, or when I was on the metro in DC and it was the last time I wore a skirt to work because I was bleeding out on the metro. All of these things, you're not going to tell them every time. But I think, to Tanika's point about storytelling, I have decided that it's really critical for me to speak up. And so now at work, I was on medical leave from a hysterectomy, and people will say something like, "Oh, I hope everything's okay." And I say, "It's great. I had a hysterectomy." And their face is sort of like, "Was that okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's something that I've wanted for a long time and I had to advocate for." I deal with, fibroids and quality of life issues. And so I want to be really vocal about this because I think it's important for other people that I work with and other people who are dealing with fibroids to have somebody speak up so that it normalizes and reduces that stigma. And B, I feel really strongly about all of the things that Tanika said in terms of Black women, right? I think that it's important for me to speak up as a white woman because there are many Black women in particular who won't feel as comfortable or who won't have the champions by their side to do this. And so I was so glad when she said, straight up racism, that is the answer, right? Reproductive rights are human rights. And the reason why Black women are offered hysterectomies is because it's a way to control their body and a way to control if they're going to have children, right? And so I just tie that back together because I think it's really important for me to speak up and speak out because I have the privilege to say things in certain settings that perhaps if Tanika said, even though I know she wouldn't hold back, she may not be received in the same way. So if there's any opportunity for me to speak up and speak out, it's because of people who maybe haven't been able to navigate the health system in the same way, or their voices have been silenced. And so I think it's just really important.
Yes, allies and advocates, because it's so important. She's so right that she could very well say something that someone would continue the conversation around. And because of what we've been taught culturally and the differences that we've had amongst each other, somebody else would walk away from me and not want to, get into an uncomfortable conversation. So I think that it's important that we're women, right? We have a common interest, and it's important for all of us to speak up on behalf of each other. So thank you, Elizabeth.
Absolutely. So we're coming to the end of our conversation. We've talked about quite a few topics so far, and this last one is sort of the everyday, right? When you're living with fibroids and you're in it, and you've got the pain and you've got the symptoms of fibroids. Elizabeth, if you could start, and Tanika, you follow. How do you get through the day? Any tips for mental health? Any tips for just getting through that bad fibroid day?
I think physically start with a lot of tampons, a lot of heavy duty tampons, a lot of big pads, all those things that you got to have in your back pocket. But I think, the biggest help for me from a mental health perspective is exactly what we're doing right now. Speak up, speak out, because it's not normal. This shouldn't be normal. If men were bleeding from their penises in the way that we were bleeding, there would have been research on this, and a cure for it 50 years ago. And so I just don't believe that by being silent, by, suffering in silence, by being a strong woman, that we're getting anywhere. So I think moments like this to get the word out and support one another and share stories. I'm so in awe of Tanika for starting the White Dress Project, because the information needs to get out there. And I love that she brought up that the member of Congress said, well, does anybody die from this? No, and that shouldn't be the baseline, right? But there can be severe complications. And if not, there are very real quality of life issues. So talking to other people that are dealing with fibroids, learning from one another, learning how to be your own best self-advocate, so that when you walk into the door of your gynecologist or your PCP, you're armed with the questions and the information to have the kind of conversation that you want. One of the most important things for me this time around, when I was talking to my PCP about this, is I said, I need your help to find a gynecologist that will perform this hysterectomy. And so she looked into gynecologists who do sort of high risk pregnancies, and gynecologists who actually do oncology surgeries, and really sort of high risk. They're willing to do things a little bit differently. And so that's what it took. And that's really, I wasn't going to stop at anything else. So I think sharing your story, being armed with information, and being in the community, exactly what Tanika said, is critically important.
Ditto. I mean, ditto, ditto, ditto. I love that Elizabeth shared her hysterectomy story. One of my dearest friends had a hysterectomy 2 days ago. And in her prep, the physician said, we may have to do a vertical cut. It's really large. We may have to take out your ovaries. And she was like, absolutely not. Like, if you get in there and you find out that that's what's happening, like, cut it off. Wake me up. I'll sign the paper. I'll go home. And I think, to Elizabeth's point, we have to get this cutesy and demure, classy girl thing and kind of put that at the side. Like, I'm classy girl all day, but we have to Elizabeth's point, just become outlandish about this. Just like, I'm Jamaican, so in Jamaica we say, like, a rude girl. Like, you just gotta, like, boss up about it. And it goes back to my earlier point of just recognizing that the power that you have within you, the power that you have about knowing what is happening in your body, the power that my friend had to say, I don't care what's going on. If it's not cancerous, like, leave my ovaries alone. Like, it's not what I signed up for. And no, I don't want to be a mom and all that, but I'm good with just the uterus coming out. Like, nothing further. So I think that when we are advocating for ourselves, it's really a confidence thing. And it's really about knowing that it's not about challenging anyone's position, expertise, all of that, but it's just knowing what you are worth. And I think there are so many times where we put that on the back burner, in the doctor's office, that it just doesn't sound quite right, but we dispel that. Another thing, I think Elizabeth put the advocacy, of it in such good context. The other thing I just want to add very briefly is you got to find your tribe. Like, my friend was able to share that with me, and I want to take the credit for it. That it's because she's known all the work that I've done, that she's been like, nah, I want my ovaries like I want them. Like, I just want them. And I think it's finding your tribe and finding those people that sometimes, even when you don't have the voice, to Elizabeth's earlier point, when you don't have the voice, someone can champion the thought for you in the room where you don't have the power to do that. Because quite frankly, Elizabeth and I are verbose, we're willing to share our story, articulate all the things, but not everybody has that level of outward expression. So we have to understand that you need to find a tribe, you need to find community. One of the biggest things outside of therapy, which leads me to answer your question, therapy really helped me through this. And I'm really glad that, therapy is having its uprising right now. Like, it's cool to go to therapy right now. So I'm glad about that. And that really helped me through, especially when you get to the point where you're like, dang, like, I have to have another myomectomy. Like, I just went through this 5 years ago. So therapy really helped me through, but it was really my tribe. And what I started to do is take a friend with me to the doctor.
Sure.
If my husband couldn't go, whether they can join me physically or not was irrelevant. I would call them on FaceTime, call them on WhatsApp, because what happens is when you're getting all that information downloaded to you, what's happening is that you're seeing all your dreams fly by. You're seeing that vacation you're going to take, and you're trying to calculate, when is the period coming? Am I going to be in pain? You're seeing that, like, I don't even want to start a new job because I can't go out the first 6 months, all the things. So when you're getting all this information in the doctor's office, diagnosis and all of that, you're seeing how many life dreams are really going past you. And it sounds really dramatic, but I promise you that is what's happening to so many people. So bringing a friend and bringing a tribe member to the doctor's office can help mitigate a lot of that. And what I mean by tribe member is someone who can come to the doctor's office with you and hear and help you process what is happening, the information that you're receiving. Just somebody there who can write notes for me, help process when I need to download, and it just helps. So I would say, like Elizabeth said, self-advocacy, knowing that you're the CEO of your body. These physicians and health practitioners work for you, and not in a disrespectful way, but marrying the information that they come with their expertise and the expertise you have about your body. So self-advocacy, therapy, don't be afraid to, my grandmother would say, lay back easy on somebody's couch. It's so helpful. And I'm glad that the stigma is being removed around that. And then third, find your tribe. Where's the community? Where are the people that you can bring with you? So many people often talk about being in the doctor's office and going to our Instagram, going to our website and being like, that's not what White Dress said, and we love to hear stories like that, because that's what we want to be. We want to be another resource.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, anything you want to add to that as we wrap up our time together?
Tanika's my new friend. Like, we're gonna hang out because this is amazing, and everything she says is so powerful, and I completely agree. In fact, Tanika, when you were talking, right before my second myomectomy, I had just started a job, and I did have to go to my bosses at the time, who I was friendly with, but I didn't know how they were going to react, and I had to say, this is what's going on, and I need to take some time off. And luckily, they were amazing. But exactly what you said, I love that image of you see your dreams going by, and not to mention that it's a serious surgery, right? When that legislator asked you, does anybody die from it? Well, you could. Anybody can die in surgery. And so all of these things, it's a serious issue, right? It's a serious women's health issue. And, one last thing that I want to mention, Tanika built it into something she said, but I think it's really important. When we say women's health issues, we mean anybody who identifies as a woman, or any trans men as well who may still have a uterus and are going through this. It could be an even harder, more difficult journey for them because it's not something that is easy to talk about. And so when we talk about women, people who identify as women, people who may no longer identify as women, anybody with a uterus can really be affected by this. And I think that that's a really critical point. And so Tanika brought it up, and I just wanted to put a fine point on that because we've covered a little bit of everything today. And it's important. This is a social justice issue. This is important for us to stand up for everybody being impacted by fibroids.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that back up because I definitely was thinking about it. Social justice issue, reproductive justice issue, and a public health issue.
Well, Tanika, Elizabeth, it was such a pleasure to have you here to spill all the fibroid beans. Top tier insights. Thank you both. Here's to not being cutesy and not being demure when it comes to our healthcare. I think that's going to be my new personal mantra. So thank you. Insiders, if you're watching, if you're new, if you just come across us, you can join the Insiders community at theinsiders.com. This is where you can get paid to share your healthcare stories, like some of the stories that were shared here during our time together. And be sure to follow us on socials. Be sure to follow the White Dress Project. Check out their work, see what they're doing. Share those resources with women that you know who may be living with fibroid. Thank you, ladies. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.